Hell's Angel saved a drunk stranger from trouble. Next morning, she remembered everything. The neon lights from Joe's bar flickered against the wet pavement as Jessica pushed through the heavy wooden door. The cool rain hit her face, mixing with the tears she couldn't hold back anymore. Her heels clicked unsteadily on the sidewalk as she hugged herself, her thin jacket doing little to shield her from the downpour. "Get it together," she whispered to herself, wiping at her mascara-stained cheeks. The 3 glasses of wine she'd had weren't helping her balance or her already fragile emotional state. Everything reminded her of him, of Mark, and the 2 years she'd wasted believing his lies, enduring his cruel words, and making excuses for his controlling behavior. A car horn blared nearby, making her jump. Jessica realized she'd been standing still, lost in her thoughts. She needed to get home, but her apartment was several blocks away, and she'd forgotten her umbrella. The rain was coming down harder now, plastering her dark hair to her face. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. She turned down Mason Street, knowing there was a shortcut through the alley behind the old hardware store. In her clearer moments, she'd never take such a route at night. But right now, she just wanted to get home and curl up in bed. The streetlights grew dimmer as she made her way down the narrow passage. Water dripped from fire escapes overhead, and the smell of wet garbage from nearby dumpsters made her stomach turn. Her shoes, completely inappropriate for this weather, squeaked against the wet concrete. The sound of laughter echoed off the brick walls, male voices getting closer. Jessica's heart started to race as she saw them. 3 men, probably in their 30s, emerging from around the corner ahead. They were already looking at her, nudging each other and grinning. "Hey there, sweetheart," one called out, his voice thick with false sweetness. "You lost?" Jessica stopped, her whole body tensing. She glanced behind her, thinking about running back the way she came, but her legs felt heavy and unsteady. "I'm fine," she managed to say, trying to keep her voice firm despite her fear. "Just heading home." "Aw, come on," another one said, moving closer. "Night's still young. Why don't you hang out with us for a while?" His friends snickered, spreading out to block more of the alley. Jessica's breath came in short gasps. The wine in her system made everything seem surreal, dreamlike. She took a step backward, her heel catching on an uneven part of the pavement. She stumbled slightly, drawing more laughter from the men. "Stay back," she warned, but her voice cracked. The men were only a few yards away now, close enough that she could smell beer on their breath. "Or what?" the first one asked, reaching for her arm. "Or you'll have to deal with me." The voice came from behind Jessica, deep, gravelly, and filled with unmistakable threat. Heavy boots scraped against the wet ground as someone moved forward, and suddenly there was a presence beside her, solid as a brick wall. The man who had reached for Jessica took a quick step back. Jessica turned her head and saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos. His leather jacket was dark with rain, and his eyes, fixed on the 3 men, held a dangerous gleam. "Back off," he growled. "Now." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. The largest of them opened his mouth as if to argue, but the newcomer took one step forward, his fists clenched, and that was enough. They backed away, muttering curses under their breath, before turning and hurrying back the way they'd come. Jessica stood frozen in place, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared up at her rescuer. The rain continued to pour, but she barely noticed it now. Under the dim light of a nearby security lamp, she could make out more details of the man who had just saved her. His beard was peppered with gray, and lines around his eyes suggested years of hard living. Tattoos snaked up his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, and his leather jacket bore the marks of countless storms. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Warm brown eyes that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. They held a gentleness that made her racing pulse begin to slow. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice softer now, but still carrying that gravelly edge. "Not at this hour." Jessica wrapped her arms tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she was. Thank you," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Those men—" "Don't think about them," he cut in, shrugging off his leather jacket. Before she could protest, he draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of it enveloped her immediately, carrying a faint scent of motor oil and leather. "I can't take your—" she started to say. "You're shivering." He turned away from her, raising his hand toward the street. Within moments, a taxi's headlights cut through the rain, and the yellow cab pulled up to the curb. Jessica fumbled in her purse for her wallet, but large, calloused hands gently stopped her. "I've got it," he said, pulling out some crumpled bills from his jeans pocket. He opened the cab door for her, and she slid into the back seat, still wrapped in his oversized jacket. The man leaned down, one hand on the cab's roof. Rain dripped from his hair as he spoke to the driver. "Make sure she gets home safe," he said, passing the money through the window. His eyes met Jessica's one more time, and she saw something there. Concern, certainly, but also something else she couldn't quite name. "Wait," she said quickly. "Your jacket." "Keep it," he replied, taking a step back from the cab. "You need it more than I do tonight." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Jessica turned in her seat to look back through the rear window. The man stood there in the rain, his white t-shirt now soaked through, watching the cab drive off. His powerful frame was illuminated by the streetlights, making him look like something out of an old movie, the mysterious stranger who appears just when needed. Damon remained rooted to his spot long after the taxi's taillights had disappeared into the rainy night. Something about the woman's vulnerable yet resilient presence had stirred something in him, a protective instinct he thought he'd buried years ago. Her eyes, though clouded by fear and whatever pain had driven her to drink alone tonight, had held a depth that caught him off guard. He ran a hand through his wet hair, sending droplets flying. "Getting soft, old man," he muttered to himself, turning toward his shop a block away. The familiar sight of Blackwood Auto Repair painted on the brick wall brought him back to reality. This was his world, engines, tools, the honest work of fixing what was broken. Not playing hero to beautiful strangers in dark alleys. The keys jingled in his hand as he approached the shop's side door, trying to shake off the lingering feeling of connection he'd felt with the woman in the taxi. He had his own demons to wrestle with, his own past to keep at bay. He didn't need any complications. Jessica's head throbbed as morning light filtered through her bedroom curtains. She squinted, her mouth dry and her thoughts scattered like puzzle pieces across her mind. Rolling over, she noticed she was still wearing last night's clothes, now wrinkled and damp from the rain. Something heavy lay across her shoulders. A leather jacket. Its worn surface caught the sunlight, and the memories of the previous night came rushing back. The bar, the rain, those men in the alley, and him, the stranger with gentle eyes and a fierce presence. "So it wasn't a dream," she murmured, running her fingers over the jacket's weathered collar. The scent of motor oil and leather still clung to it, proof that her rescuer had been real. Sitting up made her head spin, and Jessica pressed her palms against her temples. "Never drinking that much again," she promised herself, though she knew the alcohol had been an attempt to numb the pain of Mark's betrayal. Her ex's cruel words still echoed in her mind, but this morning they seemed slightly less sharp, overshadowed by the memory of a kinder voice and protective presence. Jessica dragged herself to the kitchen, desperately needing coffee. As she waited for the machine to brew, she looked around her small apartment. Everything felt different somehow, as if last night's encounter had shifted something in her world. The morning light caught the framed photo on her bookshelf, her high school graduation. She stood between her parents, their smiles stiff and formal. It was the last photo they'd taken as a family before the divorce. The coffee maker beeped, and Jessica poured herself a cup, breathing in the rich aroma. She hadn't spoken to her father in years, not since she'd left their small town behind. Their relationship had been cold and distant, filled with expectations she could never quite meet. Her phone buzzed on the counter, displaying her mother's number. Jessica frowned. Her mother rarely called this early. "Mom?" she answered, taking a sip of coffee. "Jessica, honey." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "I need you to sit down." The coffee cup froze halfway to Jessica's lips. "What's wrong?" "It's your father." A pause, heavy with unspoken words. "He passed away last night, sweetheart. A heart attack." The mug slipped from Jessica's fingers, crashing to the floor. Hot coffee splashed across her bare feet, but she barely felt it. "What?" "The lawyer called me this morning. Your father. He left everything to you, Jessica. The estate, all of it." Jessica sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The estate, her childhood home, the sprawling property that had been in her father's family for generations, the place she'd sworn never to return to. "There's more," her mother continued gently. "There are conditions in the will. You have to return to manage the estate personally. You have to live there, Jessica." The words hit her like physical blows. Return to River's Edge? The thought made her stomach clench. Every memory of that place was tainted with her parents' fighting, her father's disapproval, the suffocating weight of family expectations. "I can't," Jessica whispered, but even as she said it, she knew she had no choice. The estate was her inheritance, her responsibility now. Whatever unresolved feelings she had about her father, she couldn't just abandon her family's legacy. "The lawyer needs to meet with you as soon as possible," her mother was saying. "They're expecting you by the end of the week." Jessica stared at the spilled coffee spreading across her kitchen floor, watching it seep into the grout between the tiles. In just a few minutes, her entire world had shifted on its axis, pulling her back to the very place she'd tried so hard to escape. Jessica's hands trembled as she folded another sweater into her suitcase. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her bedroom floor, marking the passing hours since her mother's call. Her father was gone. The reality of it hadn't quite sunk in yet. She paused at her closet, running her fingers over the row of carefully arranged business suits. Would she need these in River's Edge? The small town wasn't exactly known for its corporate atmosphere. Still, she grabbed two, if only to feel like herself, the successful, independent woman she'd become, not the scared little girl who'd fled years ago. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, but her reflection in the mirror showed dark circles under her eyes and tension in her jaw. The woman staring back at her looked lost, uncertain. Everything she'd worked so hard not to be since leaving Mark. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her mother. "Called ahead to have the house cleaned. Keys will be at Thompson's real estate on Main Street." Main Street. Jessica's stomach clenched at the mere mention. She could picture it perfectly. The old brick buildings, the hardware store where her father never seemed to find what he was looking for, the ice cream parlor where she'd had her first job. Every landmark held a memory she'd rather forget. Methodically, she continued packing, focusing on the practical details to keep her emotions at bay. Toiletries in their designated bag, shoes in protective covers, documents carefully arranged in her briefcase. The familiar routine of organizing helped steady her nerves. The leather jacket, the one from last night, caught her eye where it hung over her chair. She should find a way to return it, but she had no idea how to find its owner. The mysterious man from the alley seemed like a dream now, overshadowed by the nightmare of her current reality. 3 hours later, Jessica's car was loaded, her apartment locked up, and her resignation email sent to her boss. She sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The GPS showed the route to River's Edge, 4 hours of highway driving followed by winding country roads. The city traffic thinned as she headed north, buildings giving way to rolling hills and farmland. Each mile marker brought her closer to her past, closer to the town she'd sworn she'd never return to. The familiar countryside started to appear. Old barns leaning against the sky, fields dotted with grazing cattle, ancient oak trees standing sentinel along the road. The Welcome to River's Edge sign appeared exactly where she remembered it, its paint a little more faded than before. Jessica's throat tightened as she drove past it. Population 2,847. Somehow even that hadn't changed. Main Street unfolded before her, trapped in time like a photograph. The hardware store still had the same red awning. Murphy's ice cream parlor's neon sign still buzzed and flickered. Thompson's real estate stood on the corner, its windows filled with listings for farms and family homes. Jessica slowed the car, her eyes drawn unwillingly to each familiar storefront. The diner where her mother used to take her for Saturday morning pancakes. The library where she'd hidden during her parents' worst fights. The park where she'd had her first kiss, back when life seemed simpler. And there, at the end of Cedar Lane, rose the sprawling Victorian house that had once been her home. Its gabled roof and wraparound porch loomed against the afternoon sky, every window seeming to watch her approach. The house that had felt like a prison during her teenage years now waited for her return, holding who knew what secrets behind its elegant facade. The bell above Millie's diner chimed as Jessica stepped inside. The familiar scent of coffee and apple pie wrapped around her like an old blanket, both comforting and suffocating. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, each one holding memories she'd tried to forget. "Sit anywhere you like, hun," called a waitress she didn't recognize. Jessica chose a corner booth, away from the curious glances of the other diners. The vinyl squeaked beneath her as she slid in, her fingers automatically reaching for the laminated menu even though she knew it by heart. Through the window, she watched cars crawl down Main Street, their drivers probably heading home for dinner. Everything moved slower here than in the city. The thought made her chest tight. Mrs. Peterson sat at the counter, her gray hair styled exactly the same way it had been 15 years ago. She'd taught Jessica 3rd grade, but now she stared straight ahead, either not recognizing her former student or choosing not to. At a nearby table, Tommy Richards, who'd asked her to senior prom and been turned down, concentrated on his burger, though Jessica caught him stealing glances when he thought she wasn't looking. "What can I get you?" The waitress appeared with a coffee pot, her name tag reading Sandy. "Coffee? Black," Jessica said, her voice sounding strange in her ears. "And the meatloaf special." It had been her father's favorite, though she pushed that thought away as soon as it surfaced. The coffee came in a thick white mug, steam rising in lazy spirals. Jessica wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. The diner's radio played an old country song, the kind her mother used to hum while cooking Sunday dinner. More familiar faces drifted in and out. Old Mr. Wilson from the hardware store, Sarah Mitchell, who'd been head cheerleader. Each one carried on as if Jessica were invisible, though whispers followed in her wake. She could almost hear them. "That's Jessica Turner. Remember her? Left right after high school. Her poor father. The meatloaf arrived, looking exactly as it had when she was a kid. She cut into it mechanically, each bite tasting like ash in her mouth. The green beans were overcooked, just like always. Some things never changed. When the bill came, Jessica left a generous tip and hurried out, desperate for fresh air. The evening had turned cool, and she pulled her jacket closer as she stepped onto the sidewalk. The street lamps were just flickering to life, casting long shadows across the pavement. That's when she saw him. He stood outside Blackwood Auto Repair, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. The tattoos on his arms were partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves, and his beard was neatly trimmed, a contrast to the wild appearance from the night before. But those eyes, those same gentle eyes that had looked at her with such concern in the alley, now held recognition and warmth. Jessica froze mid-step. The man who'd saved her last night wasn't just some random stranger. He was Damon Blackwood, her father's best friend, the man who'd spent countless weekends at their house, working on cars with her father in the garage, the man who'd built her a treehouse when she was 10. Their eyes met across the street, and Damon's face softened into a gentle smile. A smile that spoke of shared histories and unspoken words. A smile that said he knew exactly who she was. The world seemed to tilt beneath Jessica's feet as past and present collided in that single moment of recognition. The bell on the shop door jingled as Jessica stepped inside. The scent of motor oil and metal filled her nose, bringing back memories of weekend afternoons watching her father work on cars. Damon stood behind the counter, his massive frame somehow making the space feel smaller. "Jessica Turner," he said softly, his voice gentler than she remembered from the night before. "Been a long time?" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling like that awkward teenager again. "I didn't realize, last night, I didn't know it was you." Damon moved from behind the counter, pulling up 2 metal chairs. He gestured for her to sit. "Wouldn't have expected you to recognize me. You were just a kid last time I saw you." Jessica sat down, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. "Dad never mentioned you were still around." "Your father—" Damon paused, running a hand through his beard. "He wasn't much for talking about personal things, but we stayed close. I helped him maintain the estate these past few years." The revelation hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. All those years she'd thought her father was alone, and here was Damon, apparently a constant presence in his life. He never said anything, not in any of our phone calls. "That's George for you," Damon said, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Man could rebuild an engine blindfolded but couldn't talk about his feelings to save his life. Jessica remembered the treehouse Damon had built for her 10th birthday. She'd spent countless hours up there, reading books and dreaming of escape. "The treehouse, is it still there?" "Still standing strong," Damon nodded. "Your dad and I reinforced it last summer. He thought maybe someday." He trailed off, leaving the unspoken words hanging in the air. Tears pricked at Jessica's eyes. "I don't understand. Why wouldn't he tell me about you? About any of this?" Damon leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Your father was a proud man, Jess. After your mom left, he didn't want you to see him struggling. I think having me around, well, it reminded him of better times." Jessica wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "But you were there for him? When I wasn't?" "Someone had to be," Damon said quietly. "He missed you something fierce, but he understood why you stayed away." The weight of guilt and grief pressed down on Jessica's chest. All those years of thinking her father was this cold, distant figure, And here was this other side of him she'd never known. "I could show you the estate," Damon offered. "It's changed some since you were last there. Your father put a lot of work into it." Jessica nodded, though her emotions were churning. Part of her was grateful for Damon's presence, for knowing her father hadn't been completely alone. But another part felt betrayed, not by Damon, but by her father. How many other secrets had he kept? How much of his life had she missed because neither of them knew how to bridge the gap between them? "Give me a minute to close up shop," Damon said, standing. He moved around the garage, shutting off lights and putting away tools, while Jessica sat trying to process everything she'd learned. The man who'd protected her in that dark alley wasn't just some stranger. He was a connection to her father she never knew existed. A piece of the puzzle she hadn't even known was missing. The gravel crunched beneath their feet as Jessica and Damon made their way through what was once her family's pristine garden. Thick vines had claimed the wrought iron fence, and weeds pushed through the stone pathway. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, making the 3-story Victorian house look even more imposing than she remembered. "Watch your step here," Damon warned, reaching out to steady her as she navigated around a broken piece of statuary. "Garden's gotten a bit wild these past few months." Jessica's throat tightened as she took in the magnitude of decay. The white paint on the house was peeling, showing patches of gray wood underneath. Several shutters hung crooked, and the front porch sagged slightly on one side. This wasn't the home she remembered from her childhood. "It's overwhelming," she admitted, stopping to touch a rose bush that had grown into a thorny jungle. "I wouldn't even know where to begin." Damon's boots scuffed against the gravel as he moved beside her. "Your father had plans drawn up for restoration. He just ran out of time before he could start the work." They walked past the old fountain, now dry and stained with moss. Jessica remembered summer days spent splashing in its cool water, her father watching from the porch with a rare smile on his face. Now those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. "The foundation's still solid," Damon continued, his voice steady and reassuring. "Structure's good too. It's mostly cosmetic work needed. New paint, some carpentry, getting the gardens back in shape." As they circled around to the back of the house, Jessica spotted her old treehouse nestled in the massive oak tree. Unlike the rest of the property, it looked well maintained, its wooden walls weather-sealed and sturdy. "You weren't kidding about reinforcing it," she said softly. "Your dad spent a lot of time up there," Damon replied. "Said it helped him feel closer to you." The words hit Jessica hard. She turned away, pretending to study a cluster of wild daisies pushing through the tall grass. Her father had always seemed so distant, so unreachable. The thought of him seeking connection with her, even in her absence, made her heart ache. They continued their tour, with Damon pointing out various issues that needed attention. The greenhouse needed new glass panels, the garage door mechanism needed replacing. The back deck needed reinforcement. Each new problem added to the weight on Jessica's shoulders. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, stopping at the edge of what used to be her mother's herb garden. "The work, the cost, it seems impossible." Damon was quiet for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "There's something you should know," he said finally. "I've been helping your father with the estate's finances for the past few years. This place, there's more to it than what you're seeing right now." Jessica turned to face him, noticing how the setting sun caught the silver in his beard. Despite his imposing size and rough appearance, there was something undeniably gentle about him, something trustworthy. "What do you mean?" she asked. Damon gestured toward the house, its windows glowing amber in the evening light. For all its disrepair, there was still something magical about the old place, something that tugged at Jessica's heart. She could feel it now, a connection to this property that went beyond mere ownership. This wasn't just a house she'd inherited. It was part of her story, her history. The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Mr. Peterson's law office as Jessica sat in an uncomfortable leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The elderly lawyer adjusted his reading glasses, shuffling through a stack of papers with practiced movements. "I'm afraid the situation is quite serious, Miss Turner," Mr. Peterson said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of delivering bad news. "Your father's estate carries substantial debt, the property taxes alone." He slid a document across his mahogany desk. Jessica's eyes widened at the number at the bottom of the page. Her throat felt dry. "That can't be right." "I'm afraid it is." Mr. Peterson leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. "The estate hasn't generated significant income in years. The maintenance costs, property taxes, and outstanding loans have created a rather precarious situation." Jessica's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. Each new document revealed another financial burden, another debt she hadn't known existed. The numbers blurred together, a dance of red ink that made her head spin. "There's more," Mr. Peterson continued, pulling out another folder. "We've received multiple offers from Riverside Development Corporation. They're particularly interested in the property's location." He handed her a glossy brochure showing renderings of a modern shopping complex. The beautiful old Victorian house was nowhere to be seen in the images. Instead, there were stark buildings of glass and steel surrounded by vast parking lots. "They're offering well above market value," Mr. Peterson added. "Given the estate's financial situation, it might be worth considering." Jessica stared at the brochure, her stomach churning. The thought of bulldozers tearing through the gardens, of wrecking balls smashing through walls that held generations of memories, made her feel physically ill. "How long do I have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The property taxes need to be paid within 60 days. After that..." He spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "The bank will begin foreclosure proceedings." Jessica left the law office in a daze, the manila folder of bad news clutched to her chest. The small town's main street seemed to mock her with its quaint charm and unhurried pace. How could everything look so normal when her world was crumbling? Back at the estate, Jessica stood in what used to be her father's study. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light as she stared out the window at the sprawling grounds. The oak tree with its treehouse stood sentinel over the overgrown gardens, a reminder of better days. She spread the papers across her father's old desk, trying to make sense of the financial mess. Every solution she could think of felt impossible. She had some savings, but nowhere near enough to cover the debts. The estate needed extensive repairs before it could generate any income. And time, that precious commodity, was quickly running out. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Through the beveled glass, she could make out Damon's broad silhouette. When she opened the door, he stood there with determination etched on his weathered face. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "About the estate. I know about the developer. Word travels fast in a small town." He stepped inside, his presence filling the foyer. "I have an idea. Something your father and I discussed before he passed. If we work together, we might be able to save this place." Jessica felt a tiny spark of hope flicker in her chest as she looked up at him, waiting to hear his proposal. Jessica led Damon into her father's study, clearing space on the old mahogany desk. Papers rustled as she stacked them neatly, her hands still trembling slightly from the morning's revelations. Damon settled into one of the worn leather chairs, his large frame making it seem smaller than it was. "Your father wasn't just sitting on this property doing nothing," Damon began, his voice low and steady. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "He had a plan. We'd been working on it together for the past year." Jessica sat down across from him, her brow furrowed. What kind of plan? The estate's location isn't just prime real estate for developers, Damon explained, spreading out several documents. It's perfect for what your father wanted to create, a high-end restoration garage and classic car showroom. Jessica's eyes widened as she looked at the blueprints. The designs showed the estate's massive barn transformed into a sophisticated workshop, while the Victorian house would serve as a luxurious showroom and client meeting space. Dad never mentioned anything about this, she said, her voice soft with disbelief. He was waiting until everything was in place. Damon's fingers traced the lines of the drawings. We've already got connections with collectors across 3 states. Your father invested in specialized equipment, built relationships with potential clients. Jessica picked up a market analysis report. This is risky. Very, Damon admitted. But the potential return. He pointed to a projection sheet. We're talking about enough to not just save the estate, but make it profitable within 2 years. The numbers were impressive, but Jessica had spent enough time in business to know that projections weren't guarantees. What's the catch? We need operating capital. Your father had investors lined up, but after his passing, Damon's voice trailed off. He ran a hand through his beard, a gesture Jessica was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. Hours passed as they dove into the details. The study grew darker, and Jessica turned on the old desk lamp, casting a warm glow over their work. Empty coffee cups accumulated as they pored over financial statements, market analyses, and business plans. This client list, Jessica said, squinting at a spreadsheet. These are serious collectors. Your father had a way with people, Damon replied, his voice softening. He helped me when nobody else would. Gave me a chance to rebuild my life after I left the Angels. Jessica looked up, catching something vulnerable in Damon's expression. How did you two meet? At my lowest point, he said, shifting in his chair. I was trying to get clean, start over. Your father caught me sleeping in my car behind his property. Instead of calling the cops, he offered me work. A small smile touched his lips. Said everyone deserves a second chance. The confession hung in the air between them. Jessica felt something shift in her chest, a warming of her initial wariness. She watched as Damon bent over another spreadsheet, his strong hands surprisingly gentle with the papers, and found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The way his eyes crinkled when he concentrated, how his gruff exterior seemed to soften in the lamplight. We could look at liquidating some assets, she suggested, leaning closer to point at a particular line item. Their shoulders nearly touched, and she caught a hint of motor oil and leather from his jacket. Start smaller, build up gradually. Damon nodded, turning to face her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time in a room that suddenly felt charged with unspoken possibilities. Jessica sat at her father's desk the next morning, surrounded by loan applications and financial documents. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, catching the dancing particles in the air. Damon had brought coffee and pastries, a small gesture that somehow made the mountain of paperwork seem less daunting. The bank wants more collateral, Jessica said, pushing away another rejection letter. Her shoulders slumped as she reached for her coffee cup. I don't know what else we can offer them. Damon leaned against the edge of the desk, his arms crossed. We'll figure something out. Your father always said where there's a will, there's a way. Jessica's hand tightened around the coffee cup. Did he? Funny, he never shared any wisdom like that with me. The bitterness in her voice made Damon turn to face her fully. Want to talk about it? Jessica stared into her coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl. It's just strange, hearing about this version of my father from you, the man who gave second chances, who had dreams and plans. She set the cup down with a soft clink. The father I knew was different. How so? He was like a ghost in our house, Jessica said, standing up to pace near the window. Always working, always somewhere else. Even when he was home, he wasn't really there. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a chill. I used to sit at the dinner table trying to think of things to tell him, about school, about my friends, about anything, but he'd just nod, barely looking up from his newspaper. Damon remained quiet, letting her speak. The morning sun cast long shadows across the room as Jessica continued. When I got accepted to college, I was so excited. I rushed home to tell him. She gave a sad laugh. He was in this very study. Do you know what he said? That's nice, sweetheart. Make sure you choose a practical major. Then he went back to his paperwork. She turned to face Damon, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I spent years trying to make him proud, trying to get him to really see me. But nothing worked. When Mom finally left, I wasn't even surprised. I was just angry that she hadn't done it sooner. Jessica. Damon's voice was gentle. And now, she gestured at the papers scattered across the desk. I find out he had this whole other life. That he was capable of kindness, of helping others, of being there for someone. She wiped at her eyes. Just not for me. Damon stood up slowly, his presence steady and reassuring. Your father, he was complicated. He made mistakes, big ones, especially with you and your mother. But I don't think he knew how to fix them. That's not good enough, Jessica whispered. No, it's not, Damon agreed. But sometimes people carry so much damage they don't know how to love properly. They end up hurting the ones they care about most. Jessica looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the understanding in his eyes. Thank you, she said softly, for listening, for being here. Anytime, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. As the afternoon light began to fade, Jessica gathered the loan papers, her movements mechanical. The weight of the day's conversation settled around her like a heavy cloak. She felt the loss of her father anew. Not just the man who had died, but the father she had needed him to be. The man she now knew he could have been. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jessica walked toward the local cafe. Her conversation with Damon yesterday had left her emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. The weight of her father's memory didn't feel quite as crushing today. The bell above the cafe door chimed as she pushed it open. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh pastries wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She was about to step into line when a voice from her past froze her in place. Jessica? Her heart stumbled in her chest. She knew that voice, smooth as honey, but with an edge that had once cut her deep. Tom Harris stood by the window, his perfectly styled hair and expensive jacket exactly as she remembered. What are you doing here? The words came out sharper than she intended, her body tensing instinctively. Tom raised his hands in a gesture of peace. I heard about your father. I wanted to see how you were doing. Jessica's fingers curled into fists at her sides. After 2 years of silence, now you care? Can we talk? He gestured to an empty table. Please. Against her better judgment, Jessica found herself sitting across from him. The cafe's morning bustle faded into background noise as memories flooded back. The arguments, the manipulation, the way he'd made her doubt herself at every turn. You look good, Tom said, his smile familiar and disarming. The small-town life suits you. What do you want, Tom? Jessica kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly under the table. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I've changed, Jess. I've been seeing a therapist, working on myself. The way I treated you. He shook his head. I was wrong. So wrong. Jessica stared at her untouched coffee. The last time she'd seen him, he'd thrown her phone against the wall during an argument. He'd apologized then, too, with the same sincere eyes and gentle voice. I know I hurt you, Tom continued, but I've grown. I understand now what I did wrong. Maybe we could… Stop. Jessica's voice was quiet but firm. Just stop. Jess? No. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. You don't get to come here and disrupt my life. Not again. I'm not the same person you knew, Tom. I'm not that girl anymore. I can see that, he said softly. You're stronger now, more confident. It makes me realize what I lost. Jessica stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. What you lost? You didn't lose anything, Tom. You threw it away. With every lie, every manipulation, every time you made me feel small. Her voice remained steady despite the tremor in her hands. I don't need your apologies. I don't need your validation. And I definitely don't need you in my life anymore. Tom reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Jessica, please. Give me a chance to prove… Goodbye, Tom. She turned and walked out of the cafe, her steps quick and purposeful. Once outside, Jessica hurried toward her car, her breath coming in short gasps. The encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She drove back to the estate, her mind racing with unwanted memories and doubts. Parking in front of the old house, she sat in her car for a long moment, trying to steady her breathing. The estate loomed before her, silent and steady. She needed time alone, time to think, to process the emotional whirlwind Tom's appearance had stirred up. With unsteady legs, Jessica made her way inside, seeking refuge in the familiar walls of her father's study. She needed to think things through, to remind herself of how far she'd come, and to figure out what to do next. Jessica sat in her father's old leather chair, staring blankly at the stack of papers on his desk. The morning's encounter with Tom had left her feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out all her hard-won confidence. Her hands shook as she tried to focus on the estate's financial documents, but the numbers blurred before her eyes. A gentle knock on the door made her jump. Damon stood in the doorway, his large frame filling the space. His eyes narrowed with concern as he took in her pale face and trembling hands. "Rough morning?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Jessica attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That obvious, huh? You look like you've seen a ghost." Damon stepped into the room, keeping a respectful distance. "Something like that?" She pushed back from the desk, running her fingers through her tangled hair. "My ex showed up at the cafe this morning." Damon's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "The one who hurt you?" Jessica nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "He says he's changed, that he wants another chance." She let out a bitter laugh. "I've heard that before." Damon watched her for a moment, then made a decision. "Come on," he said, grabbing her jacket from the coat rack. "We're taking a break. But the paperwork will still be here when we get back." He held out her jacket. "Trust me on this one." 20 minutes later, they were driving down a winding dirt road in Damon's old pickup truck. The radio played softly, some classic country song about second chances and redemption. The irony wasn't lost on Jessica. The truck finally stopped at the edge of a small lake. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, and a gentle breeze rustled through the surrounding trees. It was peaceful here, away from the pressure of the estate and the ghosts of her past. They walked to the water's edge, finding a fallen log to sit on. Jessica picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the surface, watching the ripples spread out and fade. "I used to come here with your father," Damon said, breaking the comfortable silence. When things got tough, this place always seemed to help clear our heads. Jessica turned to look at him. What kind of things? Life stuff, bad decisions, regrets. He picked up his own stone and sent it skipping. Your dad wasn't perfect, but he tried his best to make things right in the end. I'm scared, Jessica admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Scared of failing with the estate, scared of making the same mistakes again. She wrapped her arms around her knees. Sometimes I look in the mirror and still see that frightened girl who let Tom control her life. Damon shifted on the log to face her. You know what I see? I see someone strong enough to walk away from a bad situation. Someone brave enough to come back here and face her past. His eyes met hers, steady and sure. That's not failure, Jessica. That's courage. But what if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough to save this place? You're not alone in this, Damon said firmly. You've got people in your corner now. People who believe in you. He gestured to the peaceful scene around them. Sometimes we just need to step back and remember that every new day is a chance to rewrite our story. Jessica felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that pushed back against the cold fear that had gripped her since seeing Tom. For the first time since returning to town, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the estate's windows as Jessica sorted through another box of her father's belongings. Damon worked nearby, fixing a stubborn cabinet door that had been squeaking for years. The rhythmic sound of his tools filled the comfortable silence between them. Jessica pulled out an old photo album, dust dancing in the sunbeam as she opened it. Her breath caught when she saw a picture of Damon and her father, both younger, standing proudly in front of the estate. Her father was actually smiling, something she rarely saw in person. I remember that day, Damon said, his voice closer than she expected. He'd moved to stand behind her, looking over her shoulder at the photograph. The warmth of his presence made her pulse quicken. Your father had just helped me get my mechanic's license. Changed my life, that man did. Jessica turned slightly, finding herself mere inches from him. His eyes were soft, lacking the hardness she'd seen when he'd confronted those men outside the bar. But the tattoos on his arms told stories of a different life, one filled with darkness and danger. What was it like? She asked quietly. Being in the hellsangels? Damon stepped back, running a hand through his beard. Not something I'm proud of, he admitted. Made a lot of mistakes. Hurt people I shouldn't have. He picked up his screwdriver, turning it over in his calloused hands. Your father was the one who helped me see there was another way. Jessica watched him work, noticing how gentle his movements were despite his strength. The same hands that had once fought in gang wars now carefully restored old furniture and helped scared women get safely home. You're not that person anymore, she said softly. No, but that person is still part of me. He met her gaze. Sometimes the past has a way of following you. The weight of his words hung between them. Jessica felt drawn to him, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he made her feel safe without making her feel weak. But there was also fear of trusting again, fear of the darkness in his past, fear of what people would think. I should check the mail, she said, breaking the moment. The lawyer said he'd be sending some documents about the estate. Outside, the mailbox was full. Bills, advertisements, and a thick manila envelope that must be from the lawyer. But underneath it all was a plain white envelope with no return address. Jessica opened it, her hands growing cold as she read the contents. The developer, Maxwell Holdings, wasn't playing nice anymore. The letter detailed their intent to acquire the property by any means necessary. They cited zoning laws, building codes, and various regulations they claimed the estate violated. At the bottom was an offer, significantly lower than the property's worth, with a 48-hour deadline. Jessica's hands shook as she read the final paragraph. Failure to accept this generous offer will result in immediate legal action. The cost of defending against such proceedings would far exceed the current offer. Consider your position carefully. She walked back inside, finding Damon still working on the cabinet. He looked up when she entered, his expression changing instantly when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Without speaking, she handed him the letter. His jaw tightened as he read, the muscles in his arms tensing. When he finished, he looked at her with concern in his eyes. "They're trying to scare you," he said, his voice low and protective. "We won't let them win." Jessica nodded, but the fear had already taken root. The developer had resources they couldn't match, and time was running out. She looked around the room, at her father's belongings, at the half-fixed cabinet, at Damon's tools spread across the floor, and wondered how much longer any of it would be hers to protect. Jessica sat in the polished leather chair across from Mr. Peterson, the loan officer at First Community Bank. Sunlight streamed through the Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across his desk. He shuffled through the stack of papers she'd provided, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose. "Your father was a good man, Mr. Peterson said, his voice gentle but firm. "I knew him for 30 years, always paid his loans on time." He removed his glasses, folding them carefully. "But Jessica, these numbers, they're concerning." She gripped the armrests of her chair, trying to keep her voice steady. "I understand the estate needs work, but with some investment, we could turn it around." "The property has significant value," he agreed, "but the current debt load is substantial. The best I can offer is $50,000. He slid a paper across his desk. "That's about a quarter of what you're asking for." Jessica's heart sank. $50,000 wouldn't be nearly enough to save the estate and fight off Maxwell Holdings. She'd known it was a long shot, but hearing the number out loud made it feel real. "Is there any way to reconsider? Maybe look at other factors?" Mr. Peterson shook his head. "I'm sorry, Jessica. Bank regulations are strict these days. Even knowing your family history, this is the most we can do." She left the bank feeling defeated, the manila envelope containing the loan offer feeling like a lead weight in her hands. The morning sun had given way to gray clouds, matching her mood perfectly. Damon was waiting outside, leaning against his truck. He straightened when he saw her face. "That bad?" $50,000, she said, her voice cracking. "That's all they'll give us." They walked to a nearby coffee shop, finding a quiet corner booth away from other customers. Jessica stirred her coffee absently, watching the cream create spiral patterns in the dark liquid. "I've been thinking," Damon said after a long silence. He placed his rough hands flat on the table, as if steadying himself. "I've got some money saved up, from the shop, from investments over the years." Jessica looked up, meeting his intense gaze. "Damon, no, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." His voice was firm but gentle. "I've got about $200,000. Combined with the bank loan, it might be enough to keep the developers at bay while we implement our plans." "But that's everything you have," Jessica said, her throat tight. "If this doesn't work—" "If it doesn't work, I lose it all," he acknowledged. "But I've rebuilt from nothing before. And your father—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Your father believed in second chances. He gave me one when nobody else would. Maybe it's time I paid that forward." Jessica stared into her coffee, tears threatening to spill. The weight of his offer pressed down on her. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust. about believing in something bigger than themselves. "I need time to think," she whispered. "Take all the time you need." But as she sat there, watching Damon's steady presence across the table, she realized she already knew her answer. This man had protected her that night outside the bar, had shown her kindness when she felt most alone, had helped her see her father in a new light. If she was going to take a risk with anyone, it would be him. "Okay," she said finally, looking up to meet his eyes. "Let's do it." The relief and determination in Damon's expression told her she'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The evening sun cast long shadows across the estate's front porch as Jessica sat on the weathered steps. She traced the grooves in the wooden planks with her finger, remembering how she used to play here as a child. The decision to invest everything weighed heavily on her mind. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Damon emerged with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, offering her one as he settled beside her on the steps. The wood groaned under his weight. "You've got that look," he said, blowing on his coffee. "What look?" "The one where you're second-guessing everything." Jessica wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Is it that obvious?" She sighed, watching a fallen leaf dance across the overgrown lawn. "I keep asking myself if I'm doing this for the right reasons. Maybe I'm just holding on to something that isn't there anymore." "What do you mean?" "This place." She gestured at the sprawling property. "Dad's legacy. Am I trying to save it because it matters, or because I'm trying to make up for lost time with him?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth all this trouble." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their coffee as the sky turned purple with approaching dusk. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of wild honeysuckle. "Can I tell you something?" Damon's voice was unusually soft. He set his mug down, clasping his hands together. "Something I've never told anyone?" Jessica turned to look at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. "Of course. Your father..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He saved my life, not just by giving me work when no one else would, but by believing in me. After I left the Hells Angels, I was lost, angry, drinking too much." He rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "One night, I wrapped my bike around a tree. Your dad found me, got me to the hospital. Could have left me there, but he didn't. He visited every day, talked to me about second chances." Jessica listened, her heart thumping heavily in her chest. She'd never heard this story before. "That's why I stayed around," Damon continued. "Helping with the estate, keeping an eye on things. I owed him everything." He turned to face her, his eyes intense in the fading light. But there was something else, too. Jessica held her breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I've had feelings for you for a long time," he admitted quietly. "Even before you left town. But your dad, he was like a brother to me, and you were his daughter. It wouldn't have been right." He looked down at his hands. "So I kept my distance, watched you grow up from afar, respected the boundaries. When you moved away, maybe it was for the best." Jessica sat perfectly still, processing his words. The crickets had started their evening chorus, filling the silence between them. "Your dad knew," Damon added softly. "He never said anything directly, but he knew. The way he'd look at me sometimes when your name came up. I think he understood." The confession hung in the air between them, as tangible as the evening mist starting to rise from the ground. Jessica felt her world shift slightly, past and present realigning themselves in a new configuration that suddenly made more sense. Jessica stared at her phone in disbelief, her hands trembling as she reread the email for the 3rd time. The morning sunlight streamed through the estate's dusty windows, but it brought no warmth to the crushing news she'd just received. "Damon," she called out, her voice shaky. "Can you come here?" Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway as Damon appeared, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. One look at Jessica's face, and his expression darkened. "What's wrong?" "Mr. Anderson pulled out." She swallowed hard. "The investment. He's not going through with it." Damon's shoulders tensed. Mr. Anderson had been their primary investor, the cornerstone of their financial plan to save the estate. Without his backing, everything they'd worked for was at risk. "Let me see." He moved closer, reading over her shoulder. His jaw clenched as he took in the details. The email was brief but devastating. Concerns about market volatility, changing priorities, apologies that seemed hollow on the screen. "We needed that money," Jessica whispered, slumping into her chair. "Without it, we can't secure the rest of the financing. The whole plan falls apart." Damon pulled up a chair beside her, the wooden legs scraping against the floor. "We'll figure something out. We've come too far to give up now." Just then, Jessica's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from their lawyer. Her face paled as she read it aloud. "The developer's getting impatient. He's threatening legal action if we don't respond to his offer by the end of the week." "He can't do that," Damon growled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Can't he?" Jessica stood up, pacing the room. "We're running out of options, Damon. The estate needs major repairs, the taxes are due, and now our main investor's gone. Maybe—" Her voice cracked. "Maybe we should just sell." "No." Damon's voice was firm. "Your father wouldn't want that." "My father's not here." The words burst out louder than she intended, echoing off the walls. Immediately, she regretted her outburst. "I'm sorry, I just—" A knock at the front door interrupted her. Through the window, they could see a familiar figure standing on the porch. Jessica's stomach dropped. "Tom?" she muttered in disbelief. Her ex-boyfriend stood there in an expensive suit, his carefully styled hair and confident smile a stark contrast to the estate's weathered appearance. Jessica hesitated before opening the door. "Jessica?" Tom said smoothly, his eyes taking in her disheveled appearance. "I heard about your troubles with the estate." "How did you—" "Small town," he shrugged. "News travels fast. Look, I think I can help." Damon moved closer, his presence protective. Tom acknowledged him with a slight nod before continuing. "I've been doing well in real estate development. My firm has the resources to help you refinance, maybe even partner with you on the renovation." He pulled out a business card. "No strings attached, just think about it." Jessica took the card automatically, her mind whirling. Tom's offer felt like a lifeline thrown into choppy waters, but something in his too-perfect smile made her uneasy. She glanced at Damon, whose face had hardened into an unreadable mask. "I'll let you consider it," Tom said, backing away. "But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't last forever." As Tom's expensive car pulled away from the estate, Jessica stood in the doorway, the business card heavy in her hand. Behind her, she could feel Damon's concerned gaze. The timing of Tom's appearance was too convenient, but with their options rapidly disappearing, could she afford to ignore any possibility of salvation? The evening sun cast long shadows through the estate's windows as Jessica sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. Empty coffee cups and scattered papers covered the wooden surface, evidence of their desperate attempts to find a solution. Tom's business card lay untouched at the corner of the table, like a thorn among roses. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," Jessica whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She looked up at Damon, who stood by the old fireplace, his broad shoulders tense. "Maybe I was fooling myself, thinking I could save this place." Damon turned to face her, his eyes softening. Tell me what's really bothering you, Jessica. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself as she walked to the window. Everything, the estate, the money, Tom showing up. She took a shaky breath. But mostly? I'm terrified of failing, of letting everyone down. My father, you, myself. You haven't let anyone down, Damon said firmly, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. Haven't I? Jessica's laugh was bitter. Look at this place. We're about to lose everything we've worked for. The developer's breathing down our necks. Our investor jumped ship. And my ex suddenly appears with an offer that feels like a deal with the devil. She turned to face Damon. What if I'm not strong enough for this? Damon's expression grew serious. You're stronger than you think, Jessica. I've watched you these past weeks, taking on challenges that would break most people. You didn't run when things got tough. You stayed and fought. But what if fighting isn't enough? Her voice cracked. Then we fight harder. Damon closed the distance between them, his presence steady and reassuring. Listen to me. I made a promise to your father to look after this place, but that's not why I'm here now. I'm here because I believe in you, Jessica. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere. Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes. Even if we lose everything? Even then. His voice was gruff but gentle. We're in this together. Something in his words sparked a warmth in her chest, pushing back the cold fear that had been consuming her. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Okay, then let's figure this out. They moved back to the kitchen table, clearing away the old papers. Damon made fresh coffee while Jessica pulled out a clean notepad. For hours, they brainstormed ideas, examining every possibility, no matter how small. What about the old greenhouse? Damon suggested around midnight, gesturing toward the abandoned structure visible through the window. Your father always said it had potential. Jessica's eyes lit up. Wait a minute. She started rifling through the estate documents. Dad's notes mentioned something about the greenhouse being historically significant. What if we could get it designated as a historical landmark? Damon leaned forward, interest peaked. That could open up preservation grants. And if we combine that with a community-based funding approach. Jessica's pen flew across the paper as she calculated figures. We could create a sustainable business plan that would appeal to local investors. Using the greenhouse as an event space, Damon added, catching her enthusiasm. Wedding venues are always in demand. Their excitement grew as the plan took shape. It was bold, requiring multiple moving parts to align perfectly, but it just might work. It would mean countless hours of hard work, careful coordination with local historical societies, and reaching out to community leaders. But for the first time since the investor pulled out, hope seemed possible. As they finished outlining their strategy, Jessica looked at Damon with determination in her eyes. This is our last shot, isn't it? Damon nodded, his expression matching her resolve. Then let's make it count. Dark clouds gathered over the estate as a sleek black car pulled up the gravel driveway. Jessica watched from the living room window, her hands clasped tightly together. The developer's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stepped out in his crisp suit, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to hold the weight of her future. Remember, Damon said quietly from behind her, we have a plan. Jessica nodded, straightening her shoulders. She opened the front door before Mr. Harrison could knock. Mr. Harrison, what brings you here unannounced? The lawyer's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. Miss Turner, I think you know why I'm here. He held up his briefcase. May I come in? Jessica led him to the study, where papers from their late-night planning session still covered the desk. Damon followed, his presence solid and reassuring as he leaned against the doorframe. Mr. Harrison placed his briefcase on the desk and pulled out a thick document. Miss Turner, my client has been more than patient. This is our final offer before we pursue legal action. He slid the paper across the desk. The terms are generous, considering the property's condition. Jessica picked up the document, but didn't open it. Mr. Harrison, I've already made my position clear. This estate isn't for sale. Miss Turner, his voice took on a patronizing tone. You must understand your situation. The property has multiple building code violations. The taxes alone are being handled, Jessica cut in, her voice firm. And the violations are being addressed. With what resources? Mr. Harrison's eyebrows rose. Your last investor pulled out. The bank won't extend any more credit. You're running out of options. There are always options, Damon spoke up, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but carried authority that made Mr. Harrison shift in his seat. The lawyer turned to face him. Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, this is a business matter between my client and Miss Turner. Actually, Damon moved to stand beside Jessica, I have a proposition for your client. Mr. Harrison's expression soured. Mr. Blackwood. Hear him out, Jessica said, her confidence growing with Damon beside her. Damon pulled out their carefully prepared proposal. Instead of buying the estate outright, your client could enter into a partnership with us. He handed the document to Mr. Harrison. The greenhouse on the property is eligible for historical landmark status. We've already started the application process. Mr. Harrison skimmed the document, his frown deepening. And, Damon continued, once approved, we'll have access to preservation grants. Combined with private investment, we'll renovate the greenhouse into an exclusive event venue. Your client gets a percentage of a profitable business without the hassle of dealing with historical preservation restrictions. Jessica watched Mr. Harrison's face carefully as he read through their proposal. His expression remained neutral, but she noticed his eyes lingering on certain sections. Finally, he looked up. This is unexpected. He closed the document slowly. You understand my client prefers a clean purchase. We understand, Jessica said, but this could be more profitable in the long run. The historical status protects the property, and the event venue fills a need in the community. Everyone wins. Mr. Harrison packed the proposal into his briefcase. I'll present this to my client, but I make no promises. He stood, straightening his tie. Expect our response within 48 hours. As he walked toward the door, he turned back. Miss Turner, Mr. Blackwood, I hope you understand that if my client rejects this proposal, we will proceed with legal action immediately. We understand perfectly, Jessica replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. After Mr. Harrison's car disappeared down the driveway, Jessica let out a long breath. She looked at Damon, hope and fear warring in her chest. They had played their last card. Now all they could do was wait. The morning sun streamed through the study's dusty windows as Jessica sorted through stacks of paperwork. Her fingers trembled slightly as she organized the financial projections, market analyses, and architectural plans they'd spent weeks preparing. Damon sat across from her, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed their presentation one final time. What if we're missing something? Jessica asked, shuffling through the papers again. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her sleepless night. Damon looked up, his expression gentle. We've gone over everything 3 times already. The numbers are solid. But what if they're not enough? She stood up and paced the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. What if the developer doesn't see the value in preserving this place? Then we'll find another way, Damon said firmly. He stood and caught her arm as she passed, stopping her nervous movement. Jessica, look at me. She turned, meeting his steady gaze. His hands were warm and calloused against her skin, grounding her in the moment. "Your father believed in this place," he said softly. "And I believe in you. Whatever happens today, we face it together." Jessica took a deep breath, drawing strength from his presence. "You're right. I can't bear the thought of losing this place now. Not after everything." A knock at the door made them both jump. Martha, the estate's longtime housekeeper, poked her head in. "The developer's car just turned onto the drive." "Thank you, Martha," Jessica said, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. She gathered the presentation materials while Damon straightened his tie. They walked to the estate's formal sitting room, where they'd set up for the meeting. Through the window, Jessica watched the developer's black SUV pull up. Mr. Chen, a shrewd businessman known for transforming historic properties into modern developments, stepped out, followed by his lawyer, Mr. Harrison. "Remember," Damon murmured, "we're not just selling him a business proposition. We're showing him a vision." Jessica nodded, squaring her shoulders as Martha showed their visitors in. Mr. Chen's expression was unreadable as he shook their hands, his grip firm and businesslike. "Miss Turner, Mr. Blackwood," he said, settling into an antique armchair. "I've reviewed your initial proposal. I must admit, it's different from what I expected." "Different can be good," Jessica replied, proud that her voice remained steady. She began setting up their presentation materials on the coffee table between them. "In business, different is often risky," Mr. Chen observed, his dark eyes sharp. "And risk requires exceptional potential reward." "Which is exactly what we're offering," Damon said, spreading out the architectural renderings. "The greenhouse renovation plans have already been approved by the Historical Society. With your investment and our management, this property could become the premier event venue in 3 counties. Jessica watched Mr. Chen's face as he examined the plans. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if everyone could hear it. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of the estate, but her future, and perhaps her relationship with Damon as well. Mr. Chen picked up the market analysis, his expression thoughtful as he began to read. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed deafening in the silence. Jessica held her breath, feeling as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if she would fall or fly. "Commences." Chen set down the market analysis and leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Your proposal is intriguing. The combination of historical preservation and modern amenities could work." He paused, studying Jessica's face. "However, I have concerns about execution." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Beside her, she felt Damon tense. "What kind of concerns?" Damon asked, his voice steady despite the stakes. Mr. Chen gestured to the architectural plans. "This kind of project requires hands-on management from people who understand both the historical value and modern business needs." He turned to Jessica. "Miss Turner, you have a business background, and Mr. Blackwood, your construction expertise is well known in the area." "That's right," Jessica said, wondering where he was going with this. "Then here's my condition," Mr. Chen said, straightening in his chair. "I'll agree to fund the renovation and partner in the business, but only if you both personally oversee the development of an additional project." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "A small, eco-friendly retreat center on the eastern portion of the property." Jessica exchanged glances with Damon. The eastern portion was currently unused, mostly wild meadow. "What exactly would this retreat center entail?" Damon asked. Mr. Chen spread out a preliminary sketch. "Sustainable cabins, minimal environmental impact, using local materials. It would complement the main estate's event business while adding a steady revenue stream." He looked at them both. "But I need to know the project will be handled by people who care about doing it right." Jessica studied the sketches. The design was tasteful, tucked into the natural landscape in a way that wouldn't detract from the estate's historic character. The Historical Society would need to approve any new construction, she said carefully. Already discussed, Mr. Chen's lawyer interjected, pulling out another document. They're tentatively on board, pending final design approval. We'd need time to review all the details, Damon said, his protective instincts showing. Of course, Mr. Chen nodded. But I need your commitment to be personally involved, both of you. Jessica felt a flutter in her stomach. Working closely with Damon for months, maybe years. The thought sent a warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with business. Could we have a moment to discuss this privately? She asked. Mr. Chen nodded, and he and his lawyer stepped out into the hallway with Martha. As soon as the door closed, Jessica turned to Damon. What do you think? He ran a hand through his hair. It's a solid business proposal. The retreat center would help secure the estate's future. He met her eyes. But it's a big commitment. We'd be working together every day. Would that be so terrible? Jessica asked softly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, not terrible at all. Jessica took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. Then let's do it. They called Mr. Chen and his lawyer back in. The next hour was spent reviewing terms, making minor adjustments, and finally signing the preliminary agreements. With each signature, Jessica felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. When Mr. Chen stood to leave, he shook both their hands. I look forward to working with you both. We'll schedule a proper meeting next week to begin detailed planning. After their visitors left, Jessica stood in the middle of the sitting room, hardly able to believe what had just happened. The estate was saved. Her father's legacy would live on, transformed but preserved. We did it, she whispered. You did it, Damon corrected, stepping closer. You found a way to save this place and make it better. Tears of relief welled in Jessica's eyes as the reality sank in. Not just the saving of the estate, but everything she'd gained in the process. Looking up at Damon, she realized that the most valuable thing she'd found wasn't the solution to saving her father's property. It was the man standing before her, who'd believed in her all along. The late afternoon sun streamed through the sitting room windows, casting long shadows across the antique furniture. Jessica stood by the fireplace, her fingers trailing along the smooth wooden mantel her father had carved years ago. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a heavy cloud had finally lifted. Damon watched her from across the room, his usual stern expression softened by the hint of a smile. Penny for your thoughts? Jessica turned to face him, warmth spreading through her chest at the sight of his gentle eyes. I was just thinking about how different everything feels. A few months ago, I came here thinking this place was nothing but a burden. She gestured around the room. Now it feels like home, Damon offered, moving closer. Yes. She nodded, surprising herself with how true it felt. But it's not just the house. Everything's changed. Damon leaned against the mantel beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You've changed too, Jessica. I've watched you grow stronger every day. I couldn't have done it without you, she said softly. When I first came back, I was so broken. The way things ended with Tom, my father's death, all the unresolved pain. She took a shaky breath. I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. You did that yourself, Damon insisted. You faced everything head on. Your father would be proud. Jessica felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. You know, I spent so many years angry at him. I thought he didn't care, that he was cold and distant. But hearing your stories about him, seeing how he tried to protect this place. She wiped at her eyes. I wish I'd known him the way you did. Damon reached out, his calloused hand gentle as he squeezed her shoulder. He made mistakes, Jessica. We all do. But he loved you in his own way. I know that now. She looked up at him, really looked at him. The man who'd protected her that night outside the bar, who'd stood by her through every challenge, who'd shown her what real strength looked like. You helped me see that love comes in many forms. The air between them grew thick with unspoken feelings. Damon's hand moved from her shoulder to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. Jessica, I'm not afraid anymore, she whispered. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The setting sun painted the room in shades of gold and pink, casting a warm glow over them both. Through the window, Jessica could see the meadow where the retreat center would be built. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the work ahead, she felt excited. Ready. We make a good team, Damon said, his voice rough with emotion. Jessica smiled, placing her hand over his where it still rested on her cheek. We do. She looked around the room, at the family photos on the walls, the worn furniture that held so many memories. You know what's strange? I came here thinking I needed to fix everything. The estate, my past, myself. But sometimes the things we think are broken just need to be loved back to life. Damon's eyes softened with understanding. He knew all about second chances, about the healing power of love and acceptance. Together they'd discovered that the past didn't have to define them, that wounds could heal, and that sometimes the most beautiful things grew from broken places. The evening settled over the estate like a soft blanket, bringing with it the gentle chirping of crickets and the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from the garden. Jessica sat on the back porch, a cup of tea warming her hands, as she watched the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in deep purples and oranges. The screen door creaked open behind her, and Damon's heavy boots scuffed against the wooden planks. He carried 2 folders under his arm and wore an expression she hadn't seen before, a mixture of nervousness and determination that made her sit up straighter. Mind if I join you? He asked, his voice gentler than usual. Of course not. Jessica shifted on the porch swing, making room for him. The swing creaked softly as he settled beside her. Damon placed the folders on his lap, his fingers drumming against them absently. You know, watching you fight for this place these past months, it's been something special. Jessica felt her cheeks warm at his words. We fought for it together. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. He opened one of the folders, revealing architectural drawings and business plans. I've been thinking about the future, not just the retreat center, but beyond that. Jessica leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against his as she studied the papers. The drawings showed additional buildings, gardens, and what looked like a community center. These are beautiful, Damon. When did you do all this? Been working on it for a while now. He cleared his throat, suddenly looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. I know we've got the deal with the developer sorted, but I was thinking, maybe we could do more. More? Yeah. He turned to face her fully, his eyes intense and sincere. I've spent most of my life running from things, my past, my feelings, any chance at real happiness. But being here with you, working together, it's shown me what's possible when you stop running and start building something real. Jessica's heart began to race as Damon pulled out a second set of papers from the other folder. This is a partnership agreement, he explained. Not just for the business, but... He took a deep breath. I want to build a life with you, Jessica, a real one. No more hiding behind walls or letting fear hold us back. Tears welled in Jessica's eyes as she looked at the man beside her. This tough exterior with such a gentle heart, who'd stood by her through everything, who'd helped her heal and grow stronger. I know it might seem fast, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. But I think we both know this isn't just about business. What we have, it's rare, special. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. I'm asking you to be my partner in everything. The retreat center, the community projects, life. All of it. Jessica looked down at their joined hands, then back up at the property stretching out before them. The estate that had once felt like a burden now held the promise of a future she'd never dared to imagine. In Damon's eyes, she saw the same hope, the same dreams, the same love that had been growing in her own heart. She squeezed his hand, her voice thick with emotion as she whispered, "Yes." A tear rolled down her cheek as she smiled. Yes to all of it. The tension in Damon's shoulders melted away as he pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. They sat there in the growing darkness, their hearts beating in sync, as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. The golden light of sunset painted long shadows across the estate's sprawling grounds as Jessica and Damon walked hand in hand along the winding path. The warmth of his palm against hers felt right, natural, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang its evening song. I still can't believe how different everything looks, Jessica said, taking in the transformation around them. Where there had once been overgrown weeds and decay, new life was sprouting. The garden beds they'd cleared last week were now lined with fresh mulch, ready for planting. Damon's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Amazing what a little care can do. His voice was soft, meant just for her. Kind of like people when you think about it. Jessica smiled, remembering how closed off they'd both been when she first returned to town. We've come a long way, haven't we? They paused at the old oak tree, its massive branches spreading overhead like a protective canopy. Jessica leaned against its trunk, still holding Damon's hand. The rough bark at her back reminded her of how solid and real this moment was. Remember when we first walked through here? Damon asked, gesturing to the property with his free hand. Place was such a mess, I wasn't sure we'd ever get it sorted. But you stayed anyway, Jessica said, squeezing his hand. Even when everything seemed impossible. Damon turned to face her, his eyes soft with emotion. Had nothing to do with the estate, if I'm being honest. He reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It was always about you. The tenderness in his touch made Jessica's heart flutter. She thought about all the walls she'd built around herself after her ex, how scared she'd been to trust again. But Damon had never tried to break those walls down. He'd simply stood beside her until she felt safe enough to lower them herself. They continued their walk, passing by the spot where they'd spent countless hours planning and dreaming. The old wooden bench where they'd shared their first real conversation about her father. The garden shed they'd cleaned out together, laughing over old photographs and forgotten treasures. I used to think coming back here was a punishment, Jessica admitted, looking up at the main house. Its windows now gleamed in the setting sun, no longer sad and neglected. But it turned out to be the greatest gift. Damon stopped walking, turning to face her. The fading sunlight caught the silver in his beard, and his eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. You know what my favorite part of all this is? What's that? Watching you come alive again, seeing you realize how strong you are, how capable. He gestured to the estate around them. You did this, Jessica. You fought for it, believed in it when nobody else did. We did this, she corrected him, stepping closer. Together. The word hung between them, full of promise. Jessica looked around at what they'd accomplished, not just the physical restoration of the estate, but the healing they'd found along the way. Each repaired fence post and cleared pathway represented another step forward, another moment of growth. Standing there with Damon as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Jessica felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Everything that had happened, the pain, the struggles, the uncertainty, had led them here, to this moment. She looked up at him, seeing in his eyes the same contentment she felt in her heart. They had found more than just a partnership. They had found a home in each other. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the estate's grounds as dozens of townspeople gathered for the community celebration. Colorful banners stretched between the oak trees, and tables laden with potluck dishes lined the freshly mowed lawn. The old property, once a symbol of decay, now buzzed with life and laughter. Jessica watched from the porch as children chased each other through the garden paths she and Damon had carefully restored. The flower beds burst with color. Purple cone flowers, yellow black-eyed Susans, and pink roses filling the air with their sweet perfume. Even the old fountain, which had been dry for years, now sparkled with crystal-clear water. "Would you look at that?" Damon said, coming to stand beside her. He nodded toward Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, who was showing a group of young families the new community vegetable garden. "Never thought I'd see the day when this place would bring people together like this." Jessica leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible." She watched as the town's mayor chatted with local business owners near the newly constructed pavilion. "Remember when we could barely get anyone to return our calls?" Damon chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "Now we can't keep them away." He gestured to the crowd. "Look at Tom and Sarah from the diner. They're already planning their fall festival here. And Mark from the hardware store wants to host workshops in the old barn once we finish converting it." The satisfaction of their success filled Jessica's heart. What had started as a desperate attempt to save her father's estate had grown into something far more meaningful. The property had become a gathering place, a source of pride for the entire community. Near the rose garden, a group of teenagers helped younger children plant sunflower seeds in small pots they could take home. The sight reminded Jessica of her own childhood dreams for this place, dreams she'd almost forgotten until Damon helped her rediscover them. "You were right," she said softly, watching as more townspeople arrived, carrying dishes and greeting each other with warm smiles. This place needed more than just repairs. It needed people to believe in it again. A gentle breeze carried the scent of barbecue from the grills, where volunteers were cooking up burgers and hot dogs. The sound of acoustic guitar floated through the air as local musicians set up under one of the shade trees. Everything felt right, as if the estate had finally found its true purpose. Jessica's gaze drifted to the newly restored gazebo, where she and Damon had spent countless evenings planning and dreaming. Now it stood as a testament to their shared vision, its white paint gleaming in the sunlight. She remembered all the obstacles they'd faced, the developers' threats, the financial struggles, the moments of doubt. But through it all, they'd held on to their faith in each other and in the possibility of something better. Standing here now, watching their hard work bloom into something beautiful, Jessica felt a profound sense of peace. The weight of her past, the pain of her father's distance, the scars from her previous relationship, had lifted. In its place was gratitude for the present and hope for the future. Damon squeezed her hand gently, and together they stepped down from the porch to join their neighbors. The land around them thrived with new purpose, just as they had found new purpose in each other. As they walked toward the celebration, Jessica knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.